Daniel, thank you for joining me this morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. It's not we've had like a heat wave in
Yeah, I
Oregon for
heard.
a little bit. So
Uh,
yeah, it's back to, not rainy yet, but just that nice
Normal
little
high.
like 60s, cloudy,
Oh, okay. So
comfortable.
we're getting there.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. With this, usually like to just start from a place of like what years you were in the Lake Oswego school district. So can you just talk about yeah, what years did you go to LOSD, and
Mhm.
what brought your family to Lake Oswego?
Yeah. Okay, so I arrived in 2014. Um, I think it was July or August when we moved into our house. And then I started my sophomore year of high school, and I was there until I graduated in 2017. Um, what brought us there was short version my dad's work. Long version is just like a very like windy story. I'm actually from the Portland area. I was born there. Um, and when I was 5, my family moved away. We went to outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a town called Framingham. We were there for 3 years, and then we lived in South Africa in the capital city, Pretoria, one of the capitals. And then we lived in Kirkland, Washington. I was there for a year and a half, and then my dad and I moved to Portland. We moved to LA, so we were there. Ultimately, I believe the reason we moved to Portland, or back to the Portland area, was because it was getting difficult for him, like going back and forth between Kirkland and Portland. He worked at Intel at the time, so I think they were in Hillsborough or Beaverton where he was going. So that's what brought us there. Um, and yeah, I knew I didn't know too much about Lake Oswego. What I heard about it when I really like I was excited to get there, to be honest. For me, it was like a kind of difficult time in my life. When I moved there was a little over a year and a half after my mom died. And we moved back to the US like very suddenly in the wake of that tragedy. Just circumstances kind of demanded it. And I didn't, it's not one of those things you realize really while you're going through it, because it's not being addressed, but it was obviously creating difficulty for me personally. And I really didn't want to move for a second time inside of 2 years, but it's what was happening. And I know that, I think it was in April or something, my dad and my sister visited the school, LOHS. And all I heard from my sister mostly was like, yeah, this place has a really nice computer lab, and they got like really cool. They've got like all of the. They're obviously very well funded. Like it's this really great, cool school, and I heard all these cool things, and I was like, well, I want to go there. Just like trying to make the best out of a situation I wasn't too happy about. And I think from my dad's point of view, it was more like, yeah, there's nice houses. It's a nice place to live. It's safe and such and such. I didn't know anything about LO. I didn't know anything about Portland really when I came back. I was, like I said, I was 5 when I left, so it's not like I had memories. Um, so it became apparent fairly quickly that it was a strange place. I think one of my aunts, who lives in Portland, I was telling her like when we were getting ready to move and stuff, I was like, yeah, we're gonna go to this place called Lake Oswego. And I just remember she was like, oh. And that was the first indication that like, oh, something's up with this place. And yeah, it just I can't say like when I started to realize that this place was strange, but it was it was pretty quick. I mean, then there's also people in your ear. Like I got family friend cousins who aren't really my cousins in Portland that I've known since I was a baby, and they were telling me things. And yeah, so what was the question?
Yeah. It was just what years were you in LSD?
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
that kind of, since
2014 to 17. That's
yeah.
that's the one.
Yeah. No, but when you talk about just like the school itself, because I think it's kind of a common thread. I know, when my parents were, because yeah, my family's originally from South Carolina.
Hmm.
My dad went down to U of O for school and stayed in Oregon. Mom was in New Jersey working as a principal at the time, which is where they met, and then decided to come back here. And when they were making choices between, where are we gonna live, where are we gonna settle down, it was either gonna be like Southwest Portland or Lake Oswego. And the
Hmm.
big impetus was like the schools. It's like the reputation of the schools, all that. They didn't,
Yeah.
being outsiders, no one had really told them about, what's happening in Lake Oswego. They didn't really have like a concept of that until after they moved there. But yeah, and so that seems to be, it's interesting because, like, again, just doing some of these interviews, just talking with people otherwise, it's a very
Hmm.
common thread, and it's kind of interesting just how that works out. But
Yeah.
even just talk about like the niceness of the school and like the facilities. I think about because they did the remodel when I was in school, I think between my freshman and sophomore years, I want to say.
Hmm.
So I remember being in a rites of passage program where they did basically like most of the students were based in Portland public schools, but like on in-service days and PPS, they basically like get everyone on the bus to come and like visit the students who were out in these other schools, who were usually, especially in a case like Lake Oswego, where you are the fly in the milk situation. It's just
Hmm.
is an interesting just visual, but also I remember like when they came to the school, because that was back when we were at the old building, and everyone was remarking
Hmm.
just like how fancy and like nice the old building was. And then fast forward a year, and we're in this thing that looks like a college campus slash dentist
Yeah.
office, you know. So yeah, that
Yeah.
that always stuck with me. But
Oh
curious, as
man.
far as like when you were back in LO, did you like did you seek out community either kind of like within the town, or more, I think for a lot of people ends up being outside of LO?
Hmm. Um, no, I didn't. I can't say I did ever, but especially not at first. And I think that is more to do like with just normal teenage stuff mixed with not so normal teenage stuff. It was a hard time in my life, and I was in a new place for what felt like the millionth time, and I I think this was also, of course, I mean, it's not like we've left this time, but this was a time where you could just bury yourself in technology if you wanted to, and I definitely leaned into kind of just more isolation. And it at that time it took me a while to get comfortable with people anyway. So even if you remove any negative influences, I think it would have been a while before I branched out. But yeah, I definitely just spent a lot of time alone. I had those cousins I mentioned before in the Portland area, but they were like deep in Beaverton and Hillsborough, and I couldn't drive, and this was before not this was not before anything. Portland just the suburbs don't really have great public transportation, so I couldn't really get around much. Like I didn't really look for community, but over time I did make some friends, which was nice.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine just, I mean, one with just the grief of the time, especially, but then, yeah, just, I don't know, in LO, because I know like my own experience, I definitely, is kind of like more spaces where either like sports spaces or other
Hmm.
spaces that my parents are like, no, we need to put him somewhere to actually be
Yeah.
around people type thing.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
really easy to like to isolate yourself, I think. And one thing that I've been reminiscing on or thinking about, and one thing that's easy to forget when we talk about this, about like kids in LO, black kids in LO, or just students of color, it's already kind of hard to be a teenager. So there is that as well. They're not just some adult person in a kid's body. Like they're going through all of these really weird feelings and hormone imbalances and angst and just insecurity already. So that's a factor too.
yeah, absolutely. To that point, can you just talk a little bit about like what that like? kind of like that day-to-day school experience was like, both just kind of like in general, but then also in terms of just like dealing with issues of racism, dealing with issues as far as being one of, not that many black students in this space that, has this whole like no Negro reputation.
Mhm. You know, I'm gonna try not to ramble. I have a tendency to do that, but there's just so many components to it, for everyone, but for me, it's very complicated because the place where I was before LO was not as bad as LO, but it was not great, It was, if I didn't go to LO, I probably would have been remembering this place, kind of in a similar fashion. Um, because it was kind of approaching that level, in Kirkland, Washington, the Lake Washington School District where I was. Um, there was a little bit more diversity. It was better. It just wasn't as bad, but it was pretty tough. So I was coming out of that already. And then there was readjusting to American life too, because I left the United States middle of 2008. I was 8 years old, and like there were certain things that I just didn't know at the time. Like I didn't know about race or racism. I lived in a place that, when my sister and I go back and look up some people that we knew on Facebook, we're like, oh, it's one of those places. But at the time, we were all innocent kids. So these things didn't really, like, we hadn't been, I don't even know the word, infiltrated, I guess, mentally by those types of things. Then we lived in South Africa, which obviously has its issues, but it's way different over there because 90% of the country is black. And even though it was only like 16 years after apartheid when we lived there, I mean, if I start dissecting it, I'm going to go off on a whole other thing, but it was just different. Just know that it was different. So coming back to the US, you have to, we were entering like a new world because race was not, it was, I could see that something was different when I got back. Something had changed. Um, then there was also this thing where at first I didn't get mad at certain things. One, because I didn't know how bad they were. And then even when I knew how bad they were for like white kids to be saying certain things or doing certain things, in my head, I kind of gave them naturally like benefit of the doubt, like, well, they're not doing this out of malice. They're, whatever. But then over time, I started to realize, oh no, they do know what they're doing, and they do know that it's going to hurt my feelings or get on my nerves. And then there's that aspect too. So when I got to LO, I was in the middle of realizing all of these things at the same time and still trying to grasp it. Concurrently, um, Ferguson was happening when I came to LO, and that for me that was really intense. That was like I don't know what the word is, but I feel like a lot of black people have a moment where they realize what's going on. Um, and for me, that was the moment on a larger scale, on an American scale, where I realized what was happening. And I even remember, I think it was in November, I was watching the news with my dad when they were talking about what was going to happen to the cop that killed Michael Brown. And I was so sure that he was going to get indicted for it. Like I did not have a doubt in my mind. And I remember saying this, and my dad was kind of just like, we'll see. Um, and I remember when they acquitted him, just how it was like, you know, I couldn't I couldn't believe it. Um, so it was like a storm going on when it came to realizing who I was in the country and like what that meant and who other people were and what that meant. Um, and then yeah, uh, once again forgot what the question was.
Oh, oh yeah, I was just
Just
asking about
hmm,
kind of like the day-to-day experiences,
oh,
both
day to day.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, just what that was like with just in general, but then also in regards to like racism
Hmm.
that you're dealing with. But also to that point though, because I think you talk a lot about those interactions with fellow students, and
Hmm.
we were talking before we hit the record button about just how so many of these stories are, so many of these experiences feel similar, even though, you said you graduated in 2017, right?
Yeah,
It was like I
yeah,
graduated in 2007. So it's like a decade apart. And yet
decade.
so many things we could describe, we're just going back and forth. It's like, yep, that's the same, like that, the
Mhm.
idea where, because I definitely leaned in that same space of like, I want to give the benefit of the doubt. This can't be,
Yeah,
like, it feels off, but it can't be this
you're
malicious, right?
just thinking. I think you're just thinking like, well, surely they don't want to like hurt me this way on purpose, because who would want to do that, you know? And but apparently some people do, or maybe they just, because they haven't gone through it, they don't know how much it really does affect you, if it does. Yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. We were talking. I was doing an interview with a student who had, graduated a couple years after me, and we're just
Mhm.
talking about like I think it's like the May Fate themes or whatever, and like how every
Oh my
year,
God, no, I saw that clip. Oh, you posted it. I saw
yeah,
it.
yeah, like every year it was
Yeah.
either a racist joke or rapey
Hmm.
joke
Oh
every
my
time.
God.
So like my year it was Let It Happen '07. For his class in 2009, they tried to get Jungle Fever passed through, and thankfully that didn't happen. But it's just like without fail every year. It's like it's something you look back on and you're just like,
Hmm.
what was like, okay, even if you want to give the benefit of the doubt to kids being stupid,
Hmm.
and it's like there are adults who also oversee this. How does this happen every time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you happen to, if that was still kind of like the motif when you were going to school, if you even remember what they
Uh,
did for yours.
I think the last one, the only one that I remember that they called it "Make Mayfade Great Again," and I didn't like that.
Well,
But
there we go.
I, it's yeah, bro. I don't know. It's tricky because Bruce. That's another thing, bro. Like when I was in LO was the rise of Trump, so it's like, fuck, dude. Oh, sorry, but like like there was so much happening in the country and in my life and in the school that was just like, oh, it brought. I feel like it brought a lot of stuff out of people. So that was my May Faith thing. The one that I remember. I feel like one of them was pretty normal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point as far as like just timing of
Mm-hmm.
that all. And I want to talk about, you know, was there any examples, and this doesn't necessarily have to be just like as far as like affirming racial identity and
Mm-hmm.
that, but just as far as like, are there examples of like supportive either teachers or like adult mentorship figures in the LO space that you had?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my history teacher, as soon as I got there, Miss Wolf Roca, was like, to be honest, like one of the best instances. Like in terms of coming across people, that was like one of the best people I could have come across at that time. She was so awesome, not just in what she taught, but I think once she noticed how I was affected, maybe she definitely made an effort to kind of like check in with stuff like that. Um, but other than her, uh, I remember my biology teacher, Miss Farrell. I don't know if she's still there, but my first year there was her first year there too. And she was also kind of like, dude, what is going on in this school? Like something is off here. And to be honest, like it's unfortunate because dealing with teenagers and the time and the school, I think she put in a lot of effort that was not received because a lot of us were also jaded because there were so many times where like over the years we would be kind of promised progress by someone, whether of like explicitly or kind of implied, and then things would fizzle out. So the eventually people show effort with certain things and you're kind of just like, yeah, like we heard it all. But yeah, those teachers were really awesome. I think those two definitely made an effort and made me feel like I wasn't crazy at the very least. Um, Other than that, I made some good friends. Um, there were, I mean, one of my best friends to this day. It's tricky because we look back and we're like, dude, if we didn't go to that school and we weren't both black, looking at who we are, I don't know that we would have really hit it off or started hanging out. But under those circumstances, we were able to build like a really solid friendship that's going on to this day. So that's good too. But in terms of adult figures, yeah, I had good teachers.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you're referring to like the Black Student Union experience when you're talking about that, but I want to put a pin in
Oh,
that real quick
mm-hmm.
because I wanted to just on the flip side of supportive teachers, and also shout out to Wolf Roca, yeah,
Oh,
Ursula.
real talk.
She's actually, it's funny because she was one of the people who brought me into yeah, with your BSU
Mm-hmm.
colleagues. Cameron was putting on some kind of conversation at the high school during the summer, and yeah, Ursula just invited me. It's like, hey, Bruce, you gotta see some of these students here. I think she showed me one of like Cameron's articles, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, okay, they're doing something back in the school. I guess I can,
Yeah.
because that was at the time where I was kind of, again, I was keeping my distance a little bit. So
Mm.
she's actually a really big reason of what kind of like has me doing this.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, on the flip side, is there any like you think of particularly like harmful incidents with teachers or adults in the school system? Is there any like stories that kind of come to mind?
You know, luckily, I can't think of any overtly harmful moments with teachers. The teachers that got on my nerves the most had nothing to do with racial aspects or anything like that. It was just normal teacher student stuff. And I think more from my end of just not wanting to, pay attention or be there. So I can't think of any. I can think that during near the end of my time, it wasn't so much. I don't even know how to describe it, but I know that like in my last year there, when the administration was maybe attempting to take steps to make things better, I think I came out of that feeling very used and confused and kind of just like what was that? Like what just happened? Because I and other students we put in a lot of effort for things. It's hard, bro. Like I'm thinking about it now and I can't even get a grasp on it. I think part of it is because I've pushed it so far to the recesses of my memory, but yeah, I feel like at times we were kind of I don't even know the word, but just kind of yeah, no, used and propped up. Um I can think of one instance, someone who I will not name. It's not a big deal or anything, but a teacher who came up to me one time and started asking me all of these questions about race and like was really interested in stuff. But when I think back to it, I get a little bit off put because I'm like, I was like a 16-year-old kid. Um, I don't necessarily feel like I should have been the one that you're coming to with this stuff. I feel like a lot of times the children of color, emphasis on children, we were treated like adults. And I don't appreciate that because we weren't really given the same chance to stumble around and figure ourselves out. But it is also me put I think I also put a lot of stuff on myself. And that's the thing too. Right now in the last couple of years is the first time I'm realizing how young I am. Because before that I always was trying to be grown and I always felt like I was much older than I am. And I put myself in situations that I took on these personas and these missions like in LO where I was just trying to save everything and save everybody. And I feel like, so it's one of those things. I don't know if I can blame the administration or if it's mostly on me letting myself be used or almost like asking to be used in that way. But I definitely came out of that just feeling just bad taste in my mouth, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of it's been a recurring theme when I've talked with students from basically like around your time to closer
Mm-hmm.
to the present, when, like you said, like there seemed to be this push for the administration to at least kind of take these issues more seriously. And yeah, the kind of recurring sentiment has just been, kind of just like lament over a lot of this like unpaid labor and like how it was
Mm-hmm.
used or how it was engaged or what was expected of you. Again, like you said, as kids to be. And I like the way you put that as far as this the expectation basically be adults as students. And when we're at that age, like I said, there's that complicating factor of we're all trying to be grown basically in
Yeah,
one way or another.
we
So
already think we're all that, you know? So
yeah, so that intersects with that too.
yeah.
It's these all these factors, like you said. So we brought up the BSU earlier, but yeah, you were part of that original Black Student Union, the first Black Student
Yeah.
Union at Lake Oswego High School, which in the 2010s, there's something to be said about, again, this the situation of the school itself, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, for again for me as a student, graduated in 2007, that was still like amazing to me to think, because that was something I never expected to see even then.
Yeah.
But yeah, can you just talk about so like that timing, like how that all came together?
Oh man, you know, I am having trouble remembering that, to
Mm.
be honest. But I remember the important bits. I know that it was Cameron Leland that brought me into it. Um, and it was like her, as far as I remember, this was her like, no, like, let's do this, let's get together, let's make things better and let's be there for each other. And we had these meetings at her house, and the first like 4 or 5 meetings, I don't know, because memory is weird and it's hard to remember how long it was, or how, yeah, I don't know, it could have been 1 month or it could have been 3 months. I can't really tell. But honestly, at first it was just it was just people hanging out, and that was so it was so nice. And her mom cooked a few times, and it was just a chance for all of us to vent, and I really really liked that. That was awesome. It was a safe space, and we had a good time. And then we would kind of like at first we would do this thing where we're like, oh, let's someone would voice this idea and this idea. We didn't really start running with stuff, I think, until later on. And this was in the fall of 2015. And then I think end of that school year, so like late or early summer of 2016. I think that's the event that you're talking about, because I feel like I remember seeing you there. Um, but yeah, yeah, it was a very cool idea, and it was very helpful just to have that support in that system.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I just think back. It's like, yeah, this would have been this would have been nice in
Yeah.
2000, 2005, 2006, 2007. But also, I think it's important when you pointed out the fact that like you were meeting at Cameron's house, and like,
Mhm.
you know, I've seen in a lot of these cases where, especially like establishing these groups, it feels like there's a certain burden on certain students or even like their families to kind of like create the environment that
Yeah,
just to make it work. But also, I guess the flip side of that is it sounds like it was incredibly welcoming in that space
it
for what it
definitely
was
was.
worth. Also,
Yeah.
I'm curious though, with because you're saying 2015, so we're talking about it's kind of like the political rise of Donald Trump and that whole environment. Was there like, I don't know, was there like pushback or hostility, or at least more pushback or hostility in the school space of just like you all existing?
Um, Honestly, I wouldn't say so, but that's not to give anyone any credit. It's just that it was so bad before that like I can't say that it made a noticeable difference. I don't think that that's the way that racism in LO operated. Whereas in the country at large, this guy coming out and saying all these outlandish things emboldened people. I feel like at LO they were already so wild that it didn't change too much. It became more like, although maybe I'm wrong, because people, with their hats and their shirts, that definitely became more annoying. Um, so I don't know. But for me, it wasn't so much how it affected the racism. It just became one more thing to be fighting against. And one thing that was frustrating for me when it came to that, the politics, was that no one really took it seriously. Um, I was coming, or I've been coming from a family and a community. My family is from Rwanda, and we've always had strong Rwandan presences kind of where we've been, whether it's family or family friends. And I know that during the rise of Trump, like I was back in Oregon where there were a lot of us, and I remembered them, from my childhood. And we would have these genocide commemorations every year, and we would talk about like the language of genocide, the language of politics, and how we have to take certain things seriously. And so for me, when Trump came around and he was saying all these crazy things and people were kind of laughing it off, I was like, it was funny for me. The first time when he had that speech and he was saying all that crazy stuff, I was chuckling with the rest of them. But then as the summer went on and as the years went on, I was like, oh no, like this is for real. And I felt like when if we were having class discussions or anything like that, and it was brought up, it was definitely dismissed. And I remember later on, when he had already like took office, there was this class discussion going on about racism, and then I started talking about like current the current at the time the current president and like racist things that he had said, and then all of a sudden the teacher stopped the discussion because we're not supposed to talk about politics, and then it became frustrating because it's like, well, politics and racism we can't separate. It's not two different things, you know what I mean? It's not apples and oranges. Like one of these is directly affected by the other. But then there became this whole thing of we want to talk about racism, but we have to do it in a way that's inclusive to everyone, which means we have to include Trump supporters in this whole thing because that's now a new thing. But to be honest, I mean, even right now, but back then as well, that's just not like that's not a political ideology that I really take seriously. And I think that in recent years, first of all, at the end of the presidency, but like with the January 6th and all that stuff, but like even right now we can see how, like the damage that's been done and the stuff that people were trying to tell people, like back then we were trying to say like if we let this happen, this is what's going to happen as a result of it. But people don't want to listen. So I think it just added to the frustration of not being taken seriously, and also having people be like, well, let's talk about racism, but let's not talk about politics because we don't want to alienate these people. And it's like, you're so interested in not alienating people who are actively causing us harm, and you're not making any type of effort to make us feel good at all. And it's just that time old story of like, what about us? Like, where's all this? Why aren't you worried about us? Why do we have to do all this work to make people who are hurting us feel better when no one, not even you, who's supposedly on our side, is doing anything to make us feel not that bad? So, yeah, those are my thoughts on it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. You talk about, especially like the environment. When you talk about just, it was so bad before then that it wasn't like as, didn't feel like super noticeable. Because
Yeah.
made me think about back in 2014, was going around the state doing some of these case studies on just like Black life in Oregon. So like a lot of it, based on the Portland area, but then also going down to like Southern Oregon, going up to the coast, and like Astoria, going to Eastern Oregon, going down to Bend and Central. And, in retrospect, so much of, I think Trump is a convenient spectacle because he totally embraces the spectacle and everything of it and the
Mhm.
ridiculousness. And he's been in our consciousness as like a public figure for so long. But to that point, as far as like some of these ideologies and all this stuff, like all that was there before, all of that, all
Mhm.
these things were ready to. I think there's a lot of people who are more so. It's not that they just oh, I became a white supremacist or I became a white supremacist sympathizer overnight. No, they've
Mhm.
always been there, but like waiting for those figures in addition to like the people who've been beating the drums on Fox News forever, but waiting for like certain politicians or people to arise basically to kind of like give people more permission to be more out
Absolutely.
about it. But like you said,
Yeah.
like it's the same, it's still, it's always been there. These people have always been there. If you've been in these environments, that's always, you know,
And we know that,
always
you
been
know,
there.
like we know that, but not everyone does. Because in 2020, I had one of my neighbors, 2020, what was going on in the summertime, like all the rallies and everything coming to the forefront on a nationwide scale. I had a neighbor as I was like moving out of that house in LO who was reminiscing on what we were up to while I was in high school. And she said, you were ahead of the curve on that. I was like, I mean, I didn't discover racism. Like I'm not the first. I no, I really wasn't. And I thought of you in the moment because I was like, well, there was obviously this guy and so many people before me in LO. But I was like, this is nothing new at all. This is just what I've been trying to tell you, what we've been trying to tell you for years and years. You just didn't notice yet until it was too in your face or too drastic to ignore. Um, but yeah, it's you or me, things happen and we're like, yeah, man, obviously. But for some people, they think that, Trump caused all this or so and so caused all this, when in reality, like you say, it just gave people permission. And a lot of folks have been lying in wait, if you will, for someone to make them feel good enough to come out like that.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I want to go back and just shout out Cameron again because I'm pretty sure she was the one who connected us. But
Yeah.
also, in addition to just something like that school alum connection, you've done writing for us specifically for our Lake Oswego review columns, and you recently put out, I believe, your first book.
Yeah.
So, well, just
Yeah.
congratulations on that. But
Thank
can you
you.
just talk about like what got you into writing?
Um, Man. Well, I don't know if you've noticed with my rambling, but I have a lot to say. So there's always been that aspect. But for as long as I can remember, I've always really been into storytelling. This goes way back to, early innocent childhood. Um, I loved two things, drawing and music. And in both efforts, it's like two forms of storytelling. I didn't really write music, but I played the piano and the cello when I was young. And it was just, I think, artistic expression. That's just always been an undertone for me. Um, and then when I was like 12, I really wanted to be a comic book artist. That was my dream in life. And so I started drawing my own characters. And then I started using other characters and I would like, draw stories based on that. And then I think when I was 14 was when I decided I wanted to be a screenwriter. And so I just started, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna write a screenplay. So I wrote a screenplay when I was 14 and it was terrible, man. I when I think back to it, it was bad, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it because I took myself very seriously and I thought I was, a grown up. So I was like, obviously, I'm gonna just do this. And yeah, over time, it was just I think I've just always been telling stories. Either it's fiction or I tell stories about my own life to myself, like how we all do, to make sense of things. Um, and then after high school, I got into like short films, and I was making short films with people, and then we got tripped up. One person got injured. I don't know if you ever met Jazari Sumter, but he was at LOHS for a second. He was in the Black Student Union at Cameron's house a few times. Um, but end of 2019, he was like the main person that I was working with on these short films, and we would. I wrote my own stuff. He wrote his own stuff. Sometimes we would collaborate. That we all came together and made him happen. And then he was hit by a car, unfortunately, end of 2019. Um, so he was, he's better now, but he was in a coma for a while. Things stopped. And then COVID happened. So even if I was going to keep going, we were way shut down. But I had the idea for the book that I did write early 2019. I was just really into big stories, and I decided to write a book because I didn't have the means to make this type of story, but I was like, I have to tell it now. So it takes place in pre-colonial Africa, and it follows the story of one person, yes, but really like a whole family, a royal family, through a war that their country is experiencing, and all the different roles that they have to play within it. And it started off only being about the spectacle, about the country and the different empires that were around at the time, and this big, like, the historic, you know, rivalry is not the right word, but obviously Europe and Africa have always been, well, to be honest, Europe has always antagonized Africa. So this was a big lens that I was going through as well. But then it became over time more of a exploration of humanity as well, and also grief and family drama and generational trauma and all of these different types of things that, as I've gotten older, I've started to notice around me more. And so it also became a way for me to process my own grief and my own difficulties, my own frustrations with life and everything in that way. So I started out just doing research on African kingdoms and empires, and I created a fictional version of history because I was reading about the empire of Mali, and I already knew some history about the kingdom of Rwanda, where my family is from. And I noticed when I was doing the research about the history of Mali, I was like, well, there were certain interesting things that were happening at the same time as, down here in Rwanda. And I know that this was going on. And so I started to play with this idea of like, well, what if instead of this one thing happening, this other thing happened, and then it would have changed into this other thing, and then over here something else would have happened. And so over the course of 100 years of fictional history that I just wrote like in one sitting, like a madman, I made it so that these two kingdoms forces kind of met and became one in a way. And so this book that I wrote follows the royal family of just Rwanda and this role that they have to serve the emperor of Mali as soldiers. And yeah, oh my gosh, man, what was the question?
No, 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 no.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
perfect. And this book is titled Children of the Sun. Can you tell people where they can find it? Because we do want to also
Oh
plug
yeah.
these works.
It's it's on Amazon. It's all print to order. So if you just type in my name, Daniel Nsengimana, and Children of the Sun, you should find it. The link is on my Instagram. Yeah, you can find it that way. Currently, it's going through a copy edit from someone else because there were a few typos that I did not catch that made it through. Not too many, but I will admit when I opened the book and I saw one or two, I was mortified. I was like, how did I let that happen? But yeah, it's up there. It's on Amazon. I'm gonna start recording an audiobook soon, so it'll be available that way. Yeah, that's where you can find it for now.
That's awesome. And it's funny you mentioned the screenplay at 14
Mhm.
earlier. If it makes me feel any better, I tried to write a screenplay in like sometime in my late 20s.
Mm.
And I'm almost positive I've not seen your screenplay, but I'm sure mine is worse,
Oh,
much worse. So
uh, I don't know, Bruce. You've got some tough competition.
uh,
Hey,
uh
writers write, right? So,
exactly. It's for any, aspiring or writers or just any writers watching this, it's always what's that cliche? It's no such thing. It's not like no such thing as like a perfect first draft. There's only
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I'm butchering the quote terribly, but it's edits, everyone. It's edits. But one of the things, speaking of the writing, just with the columns for Respond that you've touched on a lot is just this healing process. And specifically, it's kind of like in regards to like Lake Oswego, that's just the healing that's kind of like taking place after being, having some time just be somewhere else. Off again before we hit record on this, you're just talking about how like we're really talking about 3 years. Like it's 3 years that were like it felt like a lot, obviously, like in the moment, especially when you're a teenager. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's like it's a small part of life. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about again, just like what that healing process post the Lake Oswego experience, like what what is it kind of like taking you to kind of to get there or to go along that journey, I guess would be more accurate.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still getting there. So there's that. That's hard. It's hard to answer because this is truly a cliche, but it's true what they say, like time heals all wounds. So time away and time to process and not go through what you were going through, it helps. But healing from that is interesting because life is also just very hard, even when it's easy. Like being an adult is really, really hard. And there's always something going wrong. There's always something to take care of. Just a few weeks ago, somebody tried to steal my car. They smashed the window and they like messed up the ignition and all that. And I was already stressed when it happened because of a million other things, which is just, like that's just life. Which somewhere deep down I knew because my parents, my whole childhood, were trying to tell me that, but you don't appreciate it until it's happening. Um, but I think even with those hard things, being out of an environment where I felt like I was frankly under attack is made me very appreciative of the beauty of life, even in the hard stuff. This is it's a really cool thing that I feel lucky to participate in. And one component that was necessary for me was to leave Oregon. Um, LO is not the only thing that I didn't like there. Despite being born there, I don't feel like it's my home. I don't feel like it's necessarily for me. And if you're living in a place and you don't feel like it's for you, you know, it's a big country, it's a big world. It's worth it to explore and think about what might be for you. I've been coming to California my whole life. I had family here for a while, and after that, you know, once living in Portland, like California's right there, so you kind of just end up there. And then I had a friend who I actually met at LOHS who ended up living in Long Beach, and when I came to visit him, I was like, you know what, like maybe this is it. So I took that leap of faith, and something really cool happened when I came here. Which even though when I came to California, I was leaving Beaverton, which is where I was staying. So I wasn't in LO, but at the same time, I don't know if it's because, like I said, I did work, I did have a job in LO, um, or what it is, if it really is just proximity. But something amazing happened when I came here after a couple of months, where it became a lot easier to remember my life before Lake Oswego. And I started to remember, oh, like I used to live in Boston, you know, and that was a really big portion of my childhood. It was also only 3 years, but it was very impactful. And then I started to remember South Africa. I started to remember so much that, to be honest, I had forgotten. Not forgotten that it happened, but I forgotten how it felt. And so I felt like I was given access to a time in my life before all of this kind of painful unraveling happened. And you know, to be honest, I think of it like a compass. Like I had this life when I lived in South Africa, and like preceding that, where everything was very peaceful, and at times it was very idyllic. And because I had that, I kind of have this like it's buried deep down in there, but I have this sense that that's how life should be, and I feel very grateful to have that. Like I said, almost like as serve as a compass and kind of point me in the right direction and keep me trying to get back to that. And when I got out of when I got farther away from Lake Oswego, which was a big inhibitor of that sense of peace, it became so much easier to just chase it, you know. And over time, bitterness fades because I was very bitter leaving Lake Oswego. I was extremely bitter, but it kind of fades because you you realize you can't hold all of that resentment and also make space for good things to come in, good feelings, good people. I've met really cool people since being down here. Like I said, now my sister lives down here too, so that's great to have family close by. Um, this is a very ethnically diverse area that I live in, um, which, to be frank, feels a lot better than being surrounded by white people all the time. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like I did what I needed to do to move on from that part of my life. I'm still pretty far away from having that peace that I was talking about, that like that nirvana that we're all chasing. But in terms of healing from LO, I think it's worth it to take some time to figure out what that looks like for you, what you need to do. If you need to detach, then don't feel guilty for that. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty if you don't want to necessarily. I mean, you know, it's worth it to try to help other people. It's worth it to fight to make things better. But if you'd rather just be a teenager and like focus on your studies, which is a very important part of being in high school, by the way, like, you know, it's school. So, you know, don't let that stuff get in the way. And remember that there's a like it's a very long life. There's a lot left outside of just where you are now. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think we usually like to kind of like close these out with sort of twofold advice. One for students, which I feel like if you want to add something else, but I feel like that covers a lot in terms of just one, not letting, I mean, literally like stress does kill. So like letting, not letting this like eat you in a way that, it's going to follow you, is going to like really harm your health beyond
Yeah.
this. And being able to like step away, being able to, like I said, like we're all chasing that nirvana, but like there is just giving yourself space, even as someone who's kind of like, around here, does stuff with respond. We talk about again offline where it's like I've had periods in this, even this like 6 years where I've had to step back and
Mm-hmm.
regroup and get rest and everything. I think that's important. The other part of the advice thing though that I do want to ask is, you mentioned before just like that feeling of being used by specifically like these systems and whatnot. So I'm curious, as far as like advice, insights for those of us in sort of like these equity work, DEI, anti-racism spaces in LO, to specifically, I think, you can talk about other stuff as well, but specifically to not keep perpetuating that kind of like dynamic where it feels like, students are one being forced to like I do think there's something, in just any kind of like student activism advocacy that, there's going to be stress there, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a more it's a way to do this where it's not feeling like exploitative or feeling
Mm-hmm.
like it's just I think of a nicer word than like doing the dog and pony show around it, but
Mm-hmm.
honestly that's how I felt a lot. So yeah, I'm rambling, but does
Hey, no,
does
no
that make
judgment
sense?
for me, man. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think I understand what you're asking. If it's wondering like how do you avoid making kids who are participating in this feel that way, and also kind of how to guard your own, uh, guard yourself from that. I mean, it applies to both this and also just in your personal life. This is another lesson that comes. I mean, I'm far from a old man, obviously, but I know more now than I knew in high school, and like I have a better understanding of certain things. And it's I had a friend of mine who is significantly older than me, who's been around the block. He gave me a really good piece of wisdom, which was givers don't know when to stop giving, and takers don't know when to stop taking. So if you're one of those people that is naturally just very generous with their effort and energy, whether it's in your personal life or with work that you're doing, like with the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff like that. If you're one of those people who really, really wants to give and like believe in what you're doing, you might not necessarily know when to say when and when to stop because you care about it so much. You end up pouring so much of yourself into this stuff until you burn out, and then you can't do anything. And maybe on the flip side, it's important not to be resentful of the people that you might end up feeling like they put you in that position and they zapped your energy and they did all this because they might not necessarily even notice how much they're taking from you. They might be looking at you and they might be thinking, wow, look at them go, because they're just giving and giving, and they think that you have these endless reserves, because that's how you're acting. um, and it's hard to realize that you need to stop giving. And I think for me, the realization has come both with this type of work, and also the realization has come in on the more personal side of things, that if you're at risk for overextending yourself, it is you have to sit with yourself and like really check in and ask yourself, like, can I do this? Can I do this work right now? And if you can't, it's always okay to take a step back, whether it's temporary or whether it's like slightly more permanent. It's way better to take a step back and regroup, as you have done at times, that as I do kind of on more of like an indefinite scale. It's better to do that than to just keep going until you burn out, because that, I feel like, leaves you with a worse feeling. And then to circle back what I was trying to say before about, if the question is more like, what can you do if you're accepting the help of kids in the school system and you don't want them to get to that point, I would say remember that they don't really know, they don't have that perspective yet to understand that they need to take care of themselves and check in on themselves. And I mean, like I was trying to say before, it's really some kids. If you look at their social lives, their personal lives, you'll see like these are real, like we were children. So we don't know how to behave professionally and how to stop ourselves from getting to that point. So I think if we are employing the work of students, or kids who are younger, young adults, if you want to call them that, then we got to remember, we should like really, as the senior folks, you should check in and just give them that space and kind of remind them that they ought to put themselves first. And to be honest, I mean, even if you can kind of sense that they're overextending themselves, maybe stop them from doing so, even if they want to keep going, because it's like the coach that stops their player from getting injured and sits them when they're like, no, no, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. It's like sometimes as the one who's looking from above, just put the kids first. That's all I can say, because it's really some kids, and this can affect them in the long run, and hinder their life and their possibilities if they get burnt when they're 17, 16, 18 years old. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's salient. Um, yeah, Daniel, thank you again for the time and
My
just
pleasure.
the candidness today. Yeah, I hope, I feel like I say this with all these, but I really do. I hope people are listening to this. I hope people are taking it seriously, because there's there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot happening, but there's just some of these like little things, like we just talking about having that perspective to know to intervene before you when you can see that a
Mhm.
kid is about to, burn out, as a kid who's about to not just kind of getting lost in that look at them go type thing. I think that is like that's so necessary. So, anyways, yeah. Thank you again for taking the time today, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it, and yeah, I look forward to seeing like everything else that you're up to in the future. So thank you.